Pope John Paul II, A Life of Faith, Courage and Global Influence. Inspiring Lessons from the Life and Legacy of Karol Wojtyła. By T.M. Light. Description. Discover the inspiring life of Pope John Paul II, one of history's most influential spiritual leaders. From his humble beginnings in Wadowice to becoming the first non-Italian pope in 455 years, this book explores his unwavering faith, moral courage and global leadership. Learn how he faced adversity, survived an assassination attempt, championed human rights and inspired millions through service, prayer and compassion. Filled with practical lessons on resilience, ethical leadership, forgiveness and spiritual growth, this book offers a roadmap to living a purposeful, impactful life. Perfect for readers seeking Catholic history, biographies of popes and inspirational life lessons. Chapter Outline. Introduction, A Shepherd for the World. Chapter 1, Early Life in Wadowice. Chapter 2, A Calling Amid Adversity. Chapter 3, Priesthood and Academic Life. Chapter 4, Bishop of Kraków. Chapter 5, The Election to the Papacy. Chapter 6, Global Pilgrimages and Outreach. Chapter 7, Advocacy for Human Rights and Freedom. Chapter 8, Personal Challenges and Spiritual Resilience. Chapter 9, Legacy in Faith, Education and Culture. Chapter 10, Lessons from a Life of Faith and Courage. Conclusion, A Pope for All Time. Introduction, A Shepherd for the World. Few figures in modern history have left an imprint on the world as profound as Karol Wojtyła, who became Pope John Paul II. From the streets of Wadowice, a small town in Poland, to the grand stages of the Vatican and the global arena, his life tells a story of faith, courage and unwavering commitment to humanity. Born into a world marked by political upheaval, war, and oppression, Wojtyła emerged as a beacon of hope, a shepherd not just to Catholics, but to millions across the globe who were searching for meaning, inspiration, and a model of integrity. His journey is one of extraordinary resilience, leadership grounded in moral conviction, and a steadfast dedication to the principles of faith. Karol Wojtyła's life was shaped early on by profound personal experiences that demanded courage and reflection. He experienced the loss of his mother and siblings at a young age, and his father, a figure of strength and discipline, instilled in him the values of responsibility, perseverance, and integrity. These early encounters with grief and challenge were not moments of defeat, they were formative experiences that cultivated in him a deep sense of empathy, a moral compass guided by faith, and the ability to rise above adversity. Even as a young man, Wojtyła demonstrated intellectual curiosity, spiritual sensitivity, and an extraordinary capacity to see beyond his immediate circumstances, embracing a vision of life anchored in hope, service, and purpose. It was during the tumultuous years of World War II that Karol Wojtyła's character was further forged. Under Nazi occupation, he witnessed the suffering of his people, the cruelty of oppression, and the fragility of life. Yet, instead of succumbing to fear or despair, he turned inward to faith and outward to action, studying secretly in a clandestine seminary while also working in a quarry and chemical factory to survive. These experiences taught him the importance of resilience, perseverance, and the profound power of moral courage. They demonstrated that leadership is not defined by titles or accolades but by the choices one makes when confronted with adversity, and by the ability to act with integrity even when circumstances seem insurmountable. Wojtyła's path to the priesthood was both a personal calling and a response to the needs of a world in turmoil. He approached his vocation with a seriousness and devotion that would characterize his entire life. Ordained as a priest in 1946, he combined intellectual rigor with spiritual depth, studying philosophy and theology while nurturing a pastoral sensitivity that allowed him to connect deeply with individuals from all walks of life. His early years as a priest were marked by a dedication to the spiritual and intellectual formation of others, recognizing that faith must be lived, taught, and embodied. This dual focus on contemplation and action became a defining trait, enabling him to guide countless souls with wisdom, compassion, and unwavering conviction. His rise within the church hierarchy, first as Bishop of Kraków and later as a cardinal, revealed his capacity for leadership under pressure. He navigated the complexities of the church in Poland during communist oppression, with a combination of courage, diplomacy, and moral clarity. Wojtyła's leadership was rooted in an unshakable faith, and a vision that transcended political constraints. He understood that spiritual authority is inseparable from moral responsibility, and that true leadership requires listening, empathy, and a willingness to act decisively in the service of justice and truth. These lessons are as relevant today as they were in mid-20th century Europe, reminding readers that moral courage and principled leadership are essential in times of uncertainty and conflict. When Karol Wojtyła was elected Pope in 1978, taking the name John Paul II, the world witnessed a moment of profound significance. He was the first non-Italian pope in over 4 centuries, and his election symbolized not only a new chapter for the Catholic Church, but also a broader hope for humanity. His papacy would span more than 26 years, during which he traveled extensively, engaged with leaders and communities across continents, and championed human dignity, peace, and freedom. He became a global moral voice, addressing issues of war, injustice, and human rights, while never losing sight of the intimate pastoral care required of a shepherd to his flock. His influence extended far beyond ecclesiastical boundaries, inspiring leaders, activists, and ordinary people alike to embrace courage, compassion, and ethical action in their own lives. The purpose of this book is to guide readers through the life and legacy of Pope John Paul II, not merely as a historical account, but as a source of inspiration and practical wisdom. Each chapter is designed to illuminate key moments, decisions, and teachings that shaped his extraordinary journey. From his early life in Poland through the challenges of wartime occupation to his papacy and global influence, readers will encounter lessons in faith, resilience, leadership, and moral courage. These lessons are not confined to the walls of the Vatican or the history books. They are deeply applicable to our contemporary lives, offering guidance on how to navigate adversity, cultivate character, and live with purpose in a complex world. Throughout the chapters, readers will discover the importance of faith as an anchor amid uncertainty. They will explore how personal loss and suffering can be transformed into strength, compassion, and spiritual growth. They will witness the power of moral courage to confront injustice, the significance of humility and service in leadership, and the enduring impact of a life lived with integrity and vision. Pope John Paul II's example teaches us that influence is not measured solely by power or position, but by the capacity to inspire, uplift, and guide others toward truth and goodness. In addition to chronicling the events of his life, this book emphasizes the universal principles embedded in Pope John Paul II's journey. It invites readers to reflect on their own lives, to consider how they can integrate faith, courage, and moral conviction into daily decisions, relationships, and work. By engaging with his story, readers are encouraged to see challenges not as obstacles but as opportunities for growth, to recognize the value of service and compassion, and to embrace the responsibility inherent in their own potential to lead and influence the world positively. As you embark on this journey through the life of Pope John Paul II, you will encounter moments of triumph and trial, insights into the human and spiritual dimensions of leadership, and examples of resilience that transcend time and place. Each chapter will serve as both a narrative and a guide, offering not only an understanding of his life, but also practical lessons for cultivating faith, courage, and integrity in your own journey. From his childhood to his global papacy, from moments of personal grief to worldwide influence, the life of Pope John Paul II exemplifies the transformative power of a life devoted to higher purpose. This book promises more than a biography; it offers an invitation. It calls readers to embrace the principles that guided Karol Wojtyła's life: unwavering faith, courageous action, moral clarity, humility, and selfless service. It is an encouragement to live with intentionality, to rise above fear and doubt, and to act in alignment with values that transcend circumstance. Pope John Paul II's life demonstrates that a single individual, when guided by conviction, devotion, and courage, can leave a profound and enduring mark on the world. In the pages that follow, you will walk alongside Pope John Paul II from his early days in Wadowice to the global stage, exploring the experiences, decisions, and teachings that made him a shepherd for the world. You will gain insight into his spiritual practices, leadership principles, and the lessons that allowed him to navigate adversity while inspiring millions. Above all, you will witness the example of a man who lived fully, with purpose, and with an unwavering commitment to faith, justice, and the service of others. This introduction sets the stage for an exploration of a life that transcends biography and enters the realm of inspiration. Pope John Paul II's story is not simply about history; it is about the principles that shaped him, the courage that guided him, and the legacy that continues to influence the world. It is an opportunity to reflect, learn, and apply the wisdom of his life in our own journeys. By reading this book, you are invited to walk in the footsteps of a man who exemplified what it means to live with faith, purpose, and extraordinary courage, becoming a true shepherd for the world. Chapter 1: Early Life in Wadowice. The story of Pope John Paul II begins in the small Polish town of Wadowice, nestled among the rolling hills of southern Poland. Here, in a modest home on Kościelna Street, Karol Józef Wojtyła was born on May 18, 1920. From the very beginning, his life was intertwined with faith, family, and a world that would soon be upended by unimaginable challenges. To understand the man who would one day shepherd millions across the globe, one must first understand the environment that shaped him, the family that nurtured him, and the formative experiences that instilled in him resilience, moral courage, and an unshakable spiritual foundation. Karol was the youngest child of Karol Wojtyła Sr., a disciplined and devoted father who had served in the Polish army during World War I, and Emilia Kozorowska, a nurturing mother whose warmth and devotion provided the young boy with a profound sense of love and security. His family life was grounded in deep Catholic faith, a faith that would guide Karol through the trials and triumphs of his early years and beyond. The values of honesty, integrity, and compassion were woven into daily life. Karol's father, strict yet loving, emphasized responsibility, perseverance, and the importance of service to others, while his mother instilled a gentleness, a respect for human dignity, and a reverence for God that left a lasting imprint on his soul. Even as a young boy, Karol displayed signs of exceptional intellectual curiosity and moral sensitivity. He was an inquisitive child, fascinated by the world around him, asking questions about life, nature, and the meaning of human existence. His curiosity was not idle; it was accompanied by a seriousness of mind and a depth of reflection that belied his years. In school, he excelled in literature, history, and languages, demonstrating a precocious ability to absorb knowledge and apply it thoughtfully. Yet, his intellectual development was inseparable from his moral and spiritual growth. From a young age he was drawn to the mysteries of faith, finding joy and inspiration in prayer, the sacraments, and the teachings of the Church. Karol's early experiences were not without hardship. Tragedy struck his family repeatedly, shaping his understanding of loss, endurance, and the fleeting nature of life. His mother, Amelia, died when he was just 9 years old, leaving a profound void in his young heart. This early encounter with death introduced Karol to the fragility of human existence, but it also became a catalyst for spiritual maturity. He learned to turn to God for comfort and guidance, to find strength in prayer, and to understand that suffering, while painful, could be met with faith and resilience. Later, the death of his older brother Edmund, a doctor who had been a role model and companion, would further test his fortitude, deepening his empathy and sense of responsibility toward others. These losses were formative, teaching him that life's greatest challenges could be met not with despair but with courage, faith, and a determination to live meaningfully. The historical context of Karol's childhood cannot be overstated. Poland, a nation with a rich history and deep Catholic roots, had regained independence in 1918 after more than a century of partitions. Yet the country remained politically unstable, and young Karol's formative years coincided with the rise of authoritarian regimes and the threat of global conflict. By the late 1930s, Europe was on the brink of World War II, and the looming shadow of war was palpable even in the quiet streets of Wadowice. These turbulent times instilled in Karol a profound awareness of human suffering, injustice, and the moral complexities of the world. They would also strengthen his resolve, shaping a generation of young Poles who would carry the burdens of history with dignity and courage. Amid these challenges, Karol found solace and inspiration in the Catholic Church. The parish of St. Peter and St. Paul in Wadowice became a spiritual home where he learned the value of prayer, community, and service. He was particularly drawn to the life of Christ and the example of the saints, who embodied courage, humility, and steadfast faith. Even as a child, Karol demonstrated a remarkable spiritual sensitivity, often contemplating the deeper meaning of human existence and the presence of God in everyday life. His early prayer life was characterized by sincerity and intensity. He approached God not out of routine or obligation, but with genuine curiosity, reverence, and a desire for understanding. Karol's adolescence was marked by both intellectual and physical development. He was active in sports, particularly theater and hiking, which helped him cultivate discipline, teamwork, and resilience. His participation in cultural and social activities complemented his academic and spiritual growth, shaping a well-rounded character capable of leadership, empathy, and strategic thinking. These experiences nurtured qualities that would later define his papacy: the ability to communicate effectively with diverse audiences, the courage to confront challenges directly, and the capacity to inspire hope and faith in others. The onset of World War II brought unprecedented trials to Karol's life and to the people of Poland. When the Nazis occupied his homeland in 1939, the young Wojtyła faced the grim realities of oppression, persecution, and the constant threat of death. Educational institutions were closed, and many of his peers were forced into labor or deported. Karol himself took on work in a quarry, and later in a chemical factory, to avoid forced deportation and to sustain himself. These years of physical labor, danger, and hardship tested his endurance, resilience, and moral fortitude. Yet even in these difficult circumstances, he remained committed to his studies, secretly attending a clandestine seminary and continuing his intellectual and spiritual formation. This period of clandestine study and secret devotion revealed the remarkable inner strength that would characterize Karol throughout his life. He developed the ability to persevere in the face of adversity, to maintain moral clarity under pressure, and to cultivate hope where despair seemed inevitable. His experiences during the occupation demonstrated that true faith is not passive. It is active, courageous, and resilient. He learned to navigate a world filled with fear, injustice, and suffering, while holding on to a vision of goodness, justice, and divine providence. These lessons became the foundation of the leadership, courage, and moral authority that he would later bring to the papacy. Even in the shadow of war, Karol's spiritual sensitivity continued to deepen. He was drawn to the sacraments, particularly the Eucharist and confession, finding in them a source of strength, guidance, and connection to God. His devotion was not merely ritualistic, it was a living, dynamic relationship with the divine that shaped his worldview, priorities, and actions. This early spiritual discipline cultivated empathy, patience, and moral courage, allowing him to respond to life's challenges with wisdom, integrity, and compassion. The family environment, personal losses, and historical circumstances combined to forge in Karol a resilience that was both practical and spiritual. He learned that strength is not merely physical or intellectual but moral and spiritual, a steadfastness that allows one to endure suffering, confront injustice, and act decisively in alignment with one's values. These formative experiences instilled in him a deep sense of responsibility, both to God and to humanity, laying the groundwork for a life of extraordinary service, moral leadership, and global impact. By the end of his early years in Ładowice, Karol Wojtyła had already developed the essential qualities that would define his life and papacy: faith anchored in prayer and reflection, resilience forged through loss and hardship, intellectual curiosity coupled with moral discernment, and a profound empathy for the suffering of others. These traits, nurtured in the crucible of a small Polish town under the shadow of war, became the foundation upon which he would build a life of extraordinary service, courage, and inspiration for the world. Karol's early life teaches us that greatness is not bestowed by circumstance, but cultivated through character, values, and faith. It demonstrates that resilience is built through challenges, empathy is forged through loss, and leadership is nurtured in ordinary moments of responsibility, discipline, and moral courage. From the streets of Ładowice, the boy who faced the trials of family loss, the dangers of occupation, and the questions of a restless mind would emerge as a man capable of inspiring millions, navigating the moral complexities of a global stage, and embodying the principles of faith, service, and courage in every aspect of life. In reflecting on Karol Wojtyła's early years, we recognize that the seeds of extraordinary leadership, moral authority, and spiritual insight are planted in the soil of ordinary experiences, tested by adversity and nurtured by faith. His story invites readers to consider their own formative experiences, the challenges that shape character, and the faith that can guide decisions and actions. The boy from Ładowice reminds us that no matter how humble the beginnings, a life grounded in values, resilience, and devotion can leave a lasting legacy, inspire generations, and illuminate the path for others in search of meaning, courage, and hope. As we move forward in this journey, we will witness how Karol's early foundations in Ładowice became the guiding principles of his life as a priest, bishop, and ultimately Pope John Paul II. Each stage of his life reflects a continuation of the lessons learned in childhood: the courage to face adversity, the commitment to moral integrity, the importance of faith as a guiding force, and the dedication to serving others selflessly. His early life was not merely a prelude, it was the fertile ground from which a shepherd for the world would grow. Chapter 2: A Calling Amid Adversity. The journey of Karol Wojtyła, from a young boy in Ładowice to the future Pope John Paul II, was not simply a path of opportunity or privilege. It was a path forged in the crucible of adversity, tested by historical upheaval, and defined by the courage to follow a higher calling amid fear and uncertainty. From his earliest experiences, Karol sensed a pull toward something greater than himself, a vocation that would demand unwavering faith, relentless perseverance, and a willingness to face suffering in the pursuit of spiritual truth. In the shadow of a world on fire, he discovered that true vocation is not discovered in comfort, but in the decision to rise above circumstance and dedicate one's life to God and humanity. Even as a young boy, Karol was deeply influenced by his family, his parish, and the spiritual figures who surrounded him. His mother, Amelia, though she passed away when he was only 9, had instilled in him a reverence for God, a love for the sacraments, and a profound sense of moral responsibility. His father, Karol Sr., embodied discipline, duty, and resilience, shaping in him a sense of integrity and perseverance. At the local parish of St. Peter and St. Paul, he observed the priesthood in action, noting how spiritual leaders guided, comforted, and inspired their congregations. These experiences planted the seeds of a vocation that would later blossom into a life of extraordinary service. Karol understood early that a calling is not just a profession or a role. It is a response to a summons that requires the courage to act in alignment with one's deepest values and convictions. The onset of World War II dramatically altered the course of Karol's life, imposing challenges that would have crushed a less resolute spirit. In 1939, Nazi forces invaded Poland, bringing terror, oppression, and the systematic destruction of institutions, including schools and seminaries. The world around Karol descended into chaos, and the normal avenues of education, social development, and spiritual formation were disrupted. Yet even in these darkest days, the call to priesthood burned brightly within him. While many young people were forced to abandon their dreams, Karol persevered, seeking ways to continue both his intellectual and spiritual growth. To pursue his vocation, Karol enrolled in a clandestine seminary in Kraków. These secret studies were a dangerous undertaking, carried out in constant fear of discovery by Nazi authorities. The seminarians were forced to meet in hidden locations, moving frequently to avoid detection. Books, resources, and guidance were scarce, and every lesson carried the risk of punishment or death. Yet, it was in this environment of danger and scarcity that Karol's determination was refined. The clandestine seminary was not merely an academic exercise, it was a laboratory for moral courage, discipline, and faith. Each moment of study, prayer, and reflection was a declaration that divine purpose could not be silenced by tyranny, and that God's call was stronger than the threats of the world. The challenges of pursuing faith under Nazi occupation were not merely physical, they were deeply psychological and moral. Karol was constantly confronted with the realities of human suffering, cruelty, and injustice. He witnessed neighbors and friends subjected to oppression, forced labor, and deportation. The threat of death loomed over every choice, making each act of faith an act of courage. In this crucible, Karol learned to discern between fear and conscience, between survival and moral responsibility. He realized that vocation requires courage not just to act, but to remain faithful to God when doing so invites risk. It is in such moments that the true character of a person is revealed, and Karol's character, forged in adversity, would become a defining feature of his papacy decades later. During these years, Karol's daily life was a balance of labor, study, and spiritual discipline. By day, he worked in quarries and chemical factories to avoid deportation and provide for himself, often performing grueling physical labor that would have exhausted many adults. By night, he attended secret classes, studied philosophy and theology, and deepened his understanding of Scripture and Catholic doctrine. Even amid exhaustion and fear, he maintained a commitment to prayer, meditation, and reflection, believing that his vocation was both a calling and a responsibility that required preparation, dedication, and integrity. In these dual experiences, of physical toil and spiritual cultivation, Karol learned the value of discipline, perseverance, and the interconnectedness of mind, body, and soul. The formation of Karol Wojtyła's character during these years cannot be overstated. The combination of adversity, rigorous study, and moral reflection instilled in him a resilience that would define his life. He learned to face fear without succumbing to it, to act decisively even under pressure, and to trust in a purpose greater than personal safety or comfort. This period also cultivated an extraordinary empathy and awareness of human suffering. Witnessing the pain and oppression around him, Karol understood that vocation is not a solitary pursuit, but a commitment to serve and uplift others, even at great personal cost. He recognized that a true shepherd leads by example, bears the burdens of others, and acts with courage, compassion, and integrity. Karol's discernment of his calling was not only a spiritual process, but also an intellectual and moral one. He studied the writings of the saints, philosophers, and theologians, reflecting on the nature of God, the purpose of human life, and the demands of ethical action. These studies shaped his understanding of the priesthood not as a title or a role but as a mission, a responsibility to guide, teach, comfort, and inspire. He understood that the priesthood required sacrifice, moral clarity, and the courage to confront injustice. This understanding became a compass that guided him through the turbulence of occupation and the complexities of life in the decades to come. Even in moments of profound danger, Karol experienced a sense of clarity about his vocation. He reported feeling an inner call that was persistent, gentle yet insistent, urging him to dedicate his life to God and to serve humanity through the priesthood. This sense of purpose became a source of strength, enabling him to endure the hardships of war and clandestine study without losing hope or conviction. It is a powerful reminder that vocation is often revealed not in comfort but in challenge, and that faith is most deeply tested and most deeply strengthened when confronted with adversity. The moral courage Karol developed during these years would later define his papacy. He learned to act decisively in defense of truth and human dignity, to forgive even in the face of cruelty, and to remain steadfast in principle regardless of personal cost. The lessons of clandestine seminary life, labor, and the constant threat of violence taught him that resilience is not merely the ability to endure, but the capacity to remain faithful to purpose, compassionate toward others, and unwavering in moral conviction. These experiences forged the spiritual, intellectual, and emotional foundation upon which his later leadership would rest. Karol Wojtyła's early vocational journey also illustrates the profound connection between personal growth and the challenges of the wider world. The adversity he faced was not merely an obstacle to overcome, it was a teacher, a crucible that revealed his character, refined his faith, and strengthened his resolve. Through these trials he learned the value of patience, discipline, courage, and empathy, qualities that would become hallmarks of his ministry. He demonstrated that true vocation emerges when a person aligns their talents, convictions, and actions with a higher purpose, regardless of the obstacles encountered. By the end of his clandestine seminary years, Karol had not only prepared intellectually and spiritually for the priesthood, but he had also internalized the virtues that would guide him for the rest of his life: courage in the face of danger, resilience amid suffering, empathy for the afflicted, and unwavering dedication to God's call. These formative experiences created a leader capable of confronting moral complexity, inspiring hope, and guiding millions with wisdom and compassion. They demonstrated that adversity, far from being a hindrance, can be a crucible for greatness, producing leaders of extraordinary vision and moral clarity. Karol's story during this period is a profound lesson for all who seek purpose in their lives. It shows that true calling requires sacrifice, courage, and steadfastness, and that the path of vocation is rarely smooth or comfortable. It reminds us that resilience is cultivated through challenge, that moral courage is tested in moments of danger, and that faith is strengthened when lived in alignment with principle rather than convenience. His example encourages readers to confront their own challenges with determination, to trust in the guidance of conscience and faith, and to embrace the opportunities for growth that adversity presents. As Karol Wojtyła emerged from the shadows of World War II, he carried with him the wisdom, courage, and faith that would define his priesthood and eventual papacy. The trials of his early vocation taught him that a life of service is inseparable from sacrifice, that leadership is inseparable from moral courage, and that faith is inseparable from action. In the clandestine seminaries, in the factories, and amid the dangers of occupation, he discovered that a calling is not merely a personal aspiration, but a sacred responsibility to live fully, serve others selflessly, and act decisively in accordance with divine purpose. In reflecting on this chapter of his life, we see that Pope John Paul II's journey was built on the foundation of adversity met with courage, intellect directed by conscience, and faith exercised in action. His early vocational discernment was not a luxury afforded by circumstance, but a deliberate choice to respond to God's call in the midst of hardship. It teaches us that the path to purpose is often forged in trials, that the strength to lead comes from enduring, and that the courage to act morally and spiritually arises when one faces life's greatest challenges with integrity and faith. Karol's life during these years is a testament to the truth that vocation is revealed not in comfort, but in the courage to embrace purpose amidst adversity. The lessons of resilience, moral fortitude, and spiritual devotion, cultivated in these early years, would become the hallmarks of a papacy that inspired millions and transformed the world. It is a reminder that our own challenges, however daunting, are opportunities to discover purpose, build character, and respond to the call of something greater than ourselves. Chapter 3: Priesthood and Academic Life. The moment of Karol Wojtyła's ordination on November 1, 1946, was the culmination of years of disciplined preparation, clandestine study, and profound spiritual discernment. In a world still recovering from the devastation of World War II, the young priest entered a vocation that demanded more than devotion. It demanded courage, vision, and unwavering moral commitment. Karol understood that ordination was not merely a ceremonial milestone, but the beginning of a life dedicated to service, intellectual engagement, and the moral formation of both himself and those entrusted to his guidance. His priesthood would be a calling that required the harmonious integration of thought, action, and conscience, laying the foundation for the extraordinary leadership he would exercise in the decades to come. From the outset, Karol approached his priestly duties with extraordinary dedication. His early pastoral work was characterized by attentiveness to the spiritual needs of his community, a keen sensitivity to suffering, and a profound sense of responsibility. He celebrated Mass with reverence, administered the sacraments with compassion, and listened to confessions with patience and empathy. In every interaction, he sought not only to guide, but to understand the hearts and minds of those he served. This attentiveness to the human condition would become a hallmark of his ministry, revealing an innate ability to combine spiritual insight with genuine care for the individual. Karol's pastoral work extended beyond the confines of the church building. He visited families, supported the sick and the grieving, and engaged with the youth of his community. He recognized that the role of a priest was not limited to ritual or doctrine, but encompassed the broader responsibility of shaping the moral and spiritual life of the people. In a post-war Poland, where hope was fragile and communities were struggling to rebuild, his presence brought comfort, encouragement, and a sense of stability. The young priest learned that leadership is not always about grandeur or visibility. Sometimes it is expressed in quiet acts of service, attentive listening, and consistent moral example. Even as he dedicated himself to pastoral work, Karol never neglected his intellectual formation. He pursued advanced studies in philosophy, theology, and humanistic thought, understanding that knowledge and reflection were essential tools for effective ministry. His studies encompassed the works of St. Thomas Aquinas, the writings of contemporary philosophers, and the breadth of humanistic literature. He believed that faith and reason were not opposed, but complementary. A deep understanding of philosophy and theology would sharpen his ability to guide others, address moral questions, and engage thoughtfully with a complex and often conflicted world. This commitment to intellectual rigor reflected his belief that leadership and service require preparation, reflection, and clarity of thought. Karol's intellectual pursuits also cultivated his moral courage. Engaging with philosophical and ethical questions required him to confront the dilemmas of human existence, the nature of evil, the challenge of freedom, the meaning of suffering, and the responsibility of conscience. These studies were not abstract exercises. They were exercises in moral discernment and ethical formation. Karol learned to think critically, to evaluate choices in light of enduring principles, and to act decisively when moral clarity demanded it. The seeds of the moral authority he would later exercise as Pope were planted during these years of intellectual formation, revealing that true leadership is grounded in knowledge, reflection, and ethical courage. Teaching became a natural extension of Karol's intellectual and pastoral development. He was appointed to instruct seminarians and university students, guiding the next generation of clergy and thinkers. In the classroom, he demonstrated an exceptional ability to communicate complex ideas with clarity, humility, and inspiration. He encouraged critical thinking, moral reflection, and a deep engagement with both faith and reason. His students admired not only his knowledge, but his integrity, empathy, and the evident harmony between his words and his actions. In these early teaching roles, Karol discovered the transformative power of education, understanding that intellectual formation could inspire spiritual growth and ethical conduct in those who were entrusted to his care. Karol's academic pursuits were also enriched by his engagement with literature, drama, and the arts. He recognized the importance of culture in shaping human understanding and moral imagination. He was an accomplished playwright and poet, exploring themes of faith, human dignity, and moral responsibility through artistic expression. This engagement with culture demonstrated that intellectual leadership is not confined to technical expertise, but encompasses the ability to inspire, provoke reflection, and illuminate the human experience. Through literature and philosophy, Karol cultivated a capacity to connect with diverse audiences, bridging the gap between abstract thought and lived reality. Even as he excelled in teaching and scholarship, Karol never allowed intellectual pursuits to overshadow his pastoral mission. He understood that knowledge must serve humanity and be rooted in love, compassion, and moral responsibility. His early ministry revealed a balance between action and reflection, service and study, demonstrating that leadership requires both the discipline of the mind and the generosity of the heart. In his interactions with parishioners, students, and colleagues, he modeled a life in which intellectual excellence is inseparable from ethical conduct and spiritual devotion. The challenges of post-war Poland also shaped Karol's early priesthood. The country was struggling under the constraints of communist rule, which sought to suppress religious expression and control moral authority. Priests faced scrutiny, surveillance, and the constant threat of interference from political authorities. Karol navigated these dangers with prudence, courage, and moral clarity. He learned to act decisively when principles were at stake, to protect the faithful, and to advance the mission of the Church even under threat. These experiences forged in him a resilience that would define his later papacy, proving that moral leadership often requires courage in the face of opposition and perseverance in the midst of adversity. Karol's early demonstration of leadership extended beyond the classroom and parish. He became a source of inspiration for peers, seminarians, and young Poles, embodying a vision of faith that was both intellectually robust and morally grounded. He showed that true leadership is not about titles or recognition, but about influence, rooted in example, integrity, and compassion. He encouraged others to seek truth, to cultivate virtue, and to respond to life's challenges with courage and faith. In this period, Karol learned that leadership is cultivated through consistent character, disciplined action, and a commitment to serve a purpose greater than oneself. The integration of intellectual formation and pastoral responsibility also prepared Karol for the broader challenges of the world. He was acutely aware of the tensions between ideology, politics, and morality, recognizing that the priesthood demanded not only spiritual guidance, but also moral discernment in the face of societal pressures. His studies in philosophy and humanistic thought equipped him to engage with diverse perspectives, to articulate principles of justice and dignity, and to inspire ethical reflection in those he taught and guided. These skills would later allow him to address global audiences, engage with world leaders, and advocate for human rights and moral responsibility on the international stage. Karol's early priesthood was marked by a combination of humility and ambition, a humility rooted in service and selflessness, and an ambition to serve faithfully, to act courageously, and to influence positively. He embraced the responsibilities of his vocation with a sense of sacred purpose, understanding that the priesthood was both a privilege and a profound moral commitment. Each sermon, each lesson, and each pastoral visit became an opportunity to exercise leadership, foster understanding, and embody the principles he had internalized through years of formation and reflection. Even amid these responsibilities, Karol remained devoted to personal spiritual discipline. He maintained rigorous prayer practices, regular meditation, and ongoing reflection on the moral and theological questions that shaped his intellectual life. His personal devotion provided a wellspring of strength, clarity, and purpose, allowing him to navigate the demands of ministry, scholarship, and leadership with balance and integrity. It is a reminder that true service and leadership are sustained by an inner life of reflection, devotion, and alignment with higher principles. By the conclusion of this formative period, Karol Wojtyła had emerged as a priest, scholar, and leader of extraordinary promise. His ordination marked the beginning of a life dedicated to service, but it was his combination of intellectual rigor, moral courage, and pastoral sensitivity that distinguished him. He demonstrated that faith must be lived actively, that leadership is inseparable from moral responsibility, and that intellectual and spiritual formation are mutually reinforcing. These early years laid the groundwork for the extraordinary influence he would exercise as Pope John Paul II, shaping the Church, inspiring millions, and navigating the moral and spiritual complexities of the modern world with wisdom, courage, and grace. Karol's priesthood and academic life illustrate a powerful lesson for all who seek to lead, teach, or serve. True effectiveness is rooted in the integration of mind, heart, and conscience. Knowledge without compassion is incomplete, action without reflection is flawed, faith without understanding is shallow. By cultivating intellectual discipline, moral courage, and spiritual depth simultaneously, Karol demonstrated that extraordinary leadership is possible when one aligns talent, purpose, and principle in service to a greater calling. In reflecting on this chapter of his life, it becomes clear that Karol Wojtyła's early years as a priest and scholar were not merely a preparation for a future papacy. They were a living example of the transformative power of purpose, devotion, and courage. His life reminds us that intellectual development, moral courage, and pastoral dedication are not separate paths but intersecting journeys that, when pursued faithfully, can inspire, guide, and uplift generations. The priesthood gave him a platform to serve, but it was his heart, mind, and character that gave him influence. Through this integration, he demonstrated that true leadership, service, and spiritual authority are cultivated in the ordinary, disciplined, and morally courageous choices of everyday life. Karol Wojtyła's journey through priesthood and academia underscores that the foundation of extraordinary leadership is laid in moments of preparation, reflection, and ethical commitment. His life teaches us that the call to service is inseparable from the cultivation of character, the pursuit of knowledge, and the courage to act with integrity. These lessons continue to resonate, offering guidance for anyone seeking to live with purpose, lead with principle, and serve others with wisdom, compassion, and courage. The young priest from Kraków was not only preparing for a lifetime of ministry, he was preparing to become a shepherd for the world, a leader whose influence would transcend borders, generations, and even history itself. Chapter 4: Bishop of Kraków. The life of Karol Wojtyła entered a new chapter when, at the age of 38, he was appointed auxiliary bishop of Kraków in 1958, a position that would mark the beginning of his public leadership within the church and place him at the intersection of faith, society, and politics. This appointment was not simply a recognition of his intellect or his pastoral devotion. It was a testament to his moral courage, integrity, and the rare combination of wisdom and humility that allowed him to navigate the extraordinary challenges of post-war Poland. In the years that followed, Wojtyła would demonstrate that true leadership is not measured by authority alone, but by the courage to act ethically, the resilience to face opposition, and the vision to inspire others to live faithfully amid adversity. Kraków, a city with deep cultural and religious roots, was both a center of Catholic identity and a place under constant scrutiny by the communist authorities. The Polish state, under communist rule, sought to suppress religious expression, control education, and undermine institutions of moral authority. Bishops, priests, and faithful laypeople were often surveilled, censured, or intimidated, and yet in the midst of these pressures, Karol Wojtyła embraced his role with both courage and strategic prudence. He understood that leadership under oppression requires a delicate balance. One must be unyielding in principle, while remaining patient and discerning in action. This was the essence of his approach in Kraków, an approach that would shape his entire papacy. As auxiliary bishop and later archbishop, Wojtyła placed an extraordinary emphasis on pastoral care and the engagement of youth. He recognized that the Church's vitality depended on the active involvement of its members, particularly young people who were facing the pressures of ideological indoctrination, material hardship, and moral uncertainty. He began organizing youth groups, encouraging intellectual and spiritual growth, and fostering environments in which young Catholics could explore faith thoughtfully and courageously. Wojtyła believed that empowering youth was not merely an educational responsibility but a moral imperative. The future of the Church and society rested upon cultivating a generation grounded in truth, courage, and ethical conviction. One of the most remarkable aspects of Wojtyła's leadership in Kraków was his ability to integrate intellectual engagement with pastoral care. Drawing on his academic background in philosophy and theology, he delivered lectures and homilies that were both intellectually rigorous and deeply inspiring. He encouraged critical thinking, ethical reflection, and spiritual development among seminarians and laypeople alike. Through his teaching and public engagement, Wojtyła demonstrated that moral authority is inseparable from knowledge and reflection, and that leadership grounded in wisdom can guide others not through coercion, but through inspiration, example, and clarity of vision. Wojtyła's time as bishop coincided with the intensification of communist oppression in Poland. The state attempted to control education, limit public expression of faith, and suppress independent moral authority. Many religious leaders were forced into silence, exile, or compromise. Wojtyła, however, refused to allow fear to dictate his ministry. He quietly yet decisively championed the rights of the faithful, advocated for ethical integrity, and defended the Church's role as a moral and spiritual guide. His resistance was neither loud nor confrontational for the sake of spectacle. It was measured, principled, and rooted in the conviction that ethical leadership requires courage, patience, and strategic wisdom. In doing so, he became a beacon of moral clarity in a society under ideological pressure. Pastoral innovation was another hallmark of Wojtyła's leadership in Kraków. He championed initiatives that strengthened community life, fostered education, and expanded access to the sacraments. He emphasized the importance of engagement with culture, literature, and the arts as tools for moral and spiritual formation, believing that the Church's mission extends beyond ritual into the intellectual and cultural life of society. By encouraging dialogue, reflection, and creativity, Wojtyła empowered his community to resist oppression not through confrontation alone, but through the cultivation of knowledge, character, and faith. One of the most defining characteristics of Wojtyła's tenure as bishop was his ability to lead with humility and moral courage simultaneously. He was acutely aware that positions of authority carry the weight of responsibility, not privilege, and he approached every decision with careful discernment and integrity. Whether addressing theological questions, resolving conflicts within the clergy, or speaking to students and youth, he consistently demonstrated that leadership is not about asserting power, but about serving faithfully, acting ethically, and inspiring others to act with courage and conviction. This quiet resilience, grounded in principle and faith, became a model for ethical leadership that resonated far beyond the borders of Kraków. Wojtyła's engagement with young people was particularly transformative. He organized retreats, study groups, and cultural events that nurtured both intellectual and spiritual growth. He encouraged young people to think critically, to examine moral and philosophical questions, and to develop a personal relationship with God that was both reflective and courageous. Through these efforts, he cultivated leaders who were capable of moral discernment, ethical courage, and spiritual depth. His commitment to youth ministry demonstrated his belief that the future of the Church, and indeed society, rests upon the formation of individuals who can integrate faith, reason, and moral action in their daily lives. In addition to nurturing youth, Wojtyła emphasized education for all segments of society. He understood that knowledge, culture, and intellectual engagement are vital tools for moral and spiritual formation. He promoted study in philosophy, theology, literature, and the arts, encouraging dialogue and reflection even in contexts where ideological pressure sought to discourage independent thought. By combining pastoral care with intellectual leadership, Wojtyła demonstrated that true influence arises not from authority alone, but from the ability to guide hearts and minds toward virtue, understanding, and purpose. Wojtyła's leadership was also characterized by an extraordinary capacity to confront fear and adversity with composure. The constant presence of political surveillance, the threat of censorship, and the challenges of ministering under a repressive regime demanded a level of courage that was both practical and moral. Wojtyła cultivated resilience through prayer, reflection, and disciplined study, ensuring that his actions were guided by principle rather than impulse or fear. He showed that ethical leadership requires endurance, moral clarity, and the ability to act decisively even when the consequences are uncertain. His example in Kraków foreshadowed the courage, wisdom, and perseverance that would define his papacy and his global influence. The bishop's approach to leadership in Kraków offers timeless lessons in ethical courage. Wojtyła demonstrated that leadership is not about domination or visibility, but about service, integrity, and the cultivation of character. He showed that facing adversity with humility and moral clarity inspires loyalty, trust, and respect, and that resilience is built not through confrontation alone, but through steady commitment to principle, reflection, and patient action. His example illustrates that true leaders act in accordance with conscience, serve their communities with dedication, and guide others through inspiration rather than coercion. During his years as bishop, Wojtyła also cultivated the art of dialogue. He met with people from all walks of life, including students, workers, intellectuals, and clergy, listening attentively to their concerns, offering guidance, and fostering a sense of shared purpose. This capacity to listen deeply, to understand perspectives, and to respond thoughtfully strengthened his moral authority and enhanced his ability to influence effectively. His leadership in Kraków was therefore marked not only by courage and principle, but also by empathy, communication, and the ability to inspire collective action toward the common good. Wojtyła's leadership was not only administrative or pastoral, it was profoundly ethical. Every decision, every initiative, and every interaction was guided by a sense of moral responsibility that transcended personal gain, fear, or political pressure. He demonstrated that leadership is ultimately about moral witness, the ability to live according to principles, to act courageously when truth and justice demand it, and to inspire others to do the same. These lessons are as relevant today as they were in 1950s Kraków, offering guidance for anyone seeking to lead with integrity in challenging circumstances. By the end of his tenure as Bishop and Archbishop of Kraków, Karol Wojtyła had established a model of leadership that combined pastoral care, intellectual engagement, moral courage, and quiet resilience. He had strengthened the Church in Poland during a time of intense political pressure, empowered youth and students, and fostered communities capable of withstanding ideological oppression. His experience demonstrated that true leadership is inseparable from service, knowledge, and ethical courage, and that resilience is cultivated through sustained commitment to principle, faith, and action. In reflecting on this chapter of Wojtyła's life, it becomes clear that his time as Bishop of Kraków was a period of preparation for the broader responsibilities that awaited him. He honed the skills of moral discernment, intellectual leadership, and pastoral sensitivity that would define his papacy. More importantly, he demonstrated that principled leadership, rooted in faith, humility, and resilience, can flourish even under oppression, inspire communities, and shape the moral and spiritual character of a nation. Karol Wojtyła's example as bishop reminds us that leadership is a vocation grounded in service and courage. It teaches us that adversity is not a barrier, but a crucible in which character is formed, and that ethical influence is exercised not through authority alone, but through example, empathy, and principled action. The lessons of Kraków resonate beyond time and place. Leadership requires reflection, preparation, courage, and unwavering dedication to the greater good. Wojtyła's tenure in Kraków was not merely a period of professional advancement. It was a living demonstration of the power of moral integrity, quiet resilience, and visionary service in shaping lives, communities, and the course of history. Chapter 5: The Election to the Papacy. On the morning of October 16, 1978, the world witnessed a moment that would change the trajectory of the Catholic Church and leave an indelible mark on history. In the Sistine Chapel, after days of deliberation, the College of Cardinals elected Karol Józef Wojtyła as the 264th Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. In that instant, a humble man from Wadowice, Poland, who had endured the trials of war, oppression, and clandestine study, assumed a role of unprecedented spiritual and moral responsibility. As he stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica to greet a world eager for guidance, he chose the name John Paul II, honoring his predecessors and signaling his commitment to continuity, courage, and service. From the very beginning, this election was more than a personal achievement. It was a summons to leadership, vision, and mission that would resonate far beyond the borders of Italy or Poland. John Paul II's election was historic for many reasons, not least of which was his status as the first non-Italian pope in 455 years. In an institution long steeped in tradition, his election represented a profound shift, a recognition of the universality of the Church, the importance of global perspective, and the growing significance of voices outside Rome in shaping the future of Catholicism. This moment resonated deeply with Catholics worldwide, particularly in Eastern Europe, where oppression and ideological control had sought to diminish the Church's influence. For the faithful in Poland and beyond, the election of a Polish pope was a beacon of hope, proof that moral courage, resilience, and faithfulness could transcend political and cultural barriers. From the outset, John Paul II approached the papacy with a clear sense of purpose. He understood that the role of the Pope was not merely ceremonial or administrative, but profoundly spiritual and deeply moral. He carried with him the lessons of his life, the resilience forged in Wadowice, the courage cultivated under Nazi occupation, the intellectual discipline of his academic formation, and the ethical fortitude honed as Bishop of Kraków. These experiences informed a vision of the papacy that was global in scope, rooted in faith, and committed to the dignity of every human being. He recognized that the Church's mission was not confined to rituals or doctrine alone, but encompassed the promotion of justice, the defense of human rights, and the moral guidance of a rapidly changing world. The early days of John Paul II's papacy were marked by immense expectations and unprecedented challenges. He assumed leadership at a time when the world was fraught with ideological conflict, political tension, and social upheaval. The Cold War divided nations, systems of oppression threatened freedom, and moral and spiritual crises challenged the faithful in ways that demanded courage, clarity, and vision. Within the Church, he faced the task of uniting diverse communities, addressing theological debates, and guiding clergy and laity through a period of transformation and uncertainty. Yet, even in the face of such monumental responsibility, John Paul II approached his mission with humility, determination, and an unwavering commitment to service. One of the hallmarks of John Paul II's early papacy was his commitment to outreach. He understood that the Pope's influence extended beyond the walls of the Vatican, into the hearts, minds, and lives of millions around the globe. He embarked on a series of pastoral journeys that would eventually become a defining feature of his leadership, traveling to countries often overlooked or threatened by political and social unrest. Through these journeys he sought to bring the message of faith, hope, and human dignity to all corners of the world. He demonstrated that spiritual leadership is not abstract or distant, but active, engaged, and compassionate. By meeting people face to face, listening to their stories, and offering guidance, John Paul II embodied the principle that true authority is exercised through service, presence, and empathy. John Paul II also recognized the importance of dialogue and diplomacy in advancing the Church's mission. He engaged world leaders, heads of state, and representatives of other religions with respect, clarity, and moral courage. In a world divided by ideology and conflict, he acted as a moral compass, advocating for peace, human rights, and the inherent dignity of every individual. His interventions were not merely political, they were ethical and spiritual, grounded in the conviction that faith carries with it the responsibility to confront injustice, advocate for the marginalized, and inspire ethical action. He demonstrated that moral authority requires not only courage, but strategic wisdom, patience, and the ability to navigate complexity without compromising principle. The vision of John Paul II, extended deeply into the spiritual life of the Church. He emphasized the importance of personal devotion, prayer, and sacramental life as the foundation for moral and ethical living. He encouraged Catholics to cultivate a relationship with God that was personal, reflective, and active, demonstrating that faith is not a passive inheritance, but a dynamic engagement with the divine. He also underscored the responsibility of the Church to address the moral and spiritual needs of contemporary society, promoting teachings that reinforced human dignity, ethical integrity, and the pursuit of justice. Early in his papacy, John Paul II faced significant challenges that tested both his resilience and moral courage. He confronted issues ranging from theological debates within the Church to the complexities of global politics, from ideological conflict in Eastern Europe to questions of social and economic justice. Yet through every challenge he relied on the principles that had guided his life: faith, moral clarity, intellectual rigor, and compassion. He demonstrated that leadership is inseparable from ethical responsibility, and that the ability to act decisively with integrity is the defining characteristic of true authority. One of the most significant aspects of John Paul II's early vision was his commitment to the promotion of human dignity. He understood that the Church's mission was not merely spiritual or ritualistic, but deeply ethical and social. He championed causes that defended the oppressed, supported the marginalized, and advocated for fundamental human rights. His vision was a Church that was active in the world, engaged with contemporary challenges, and unwavering in its commitment to justice and morality. Through this focus, he demonstrated that spiritual leadership is inseparable from ethical engagement, and that true influence arises when faith is translated into action. John Paul II's election also symbolized the universality of the Church and its mission. He represented the idea that the Catholic Church transcends borders, cultures, and political systems. His presence as a non-Italian pope challenged assumptions, broadened perspectives, and reinforced the notion that faith and leadership are not confined to tradition or nationality, but are accessible to all who embody virtue, courage, and devotion. In this sense, his papacy was not only a spiritual leadership role, but also a global symbol of hope, resilience, and moral courage for people of every nation, faith, and background. From the earliest days of his papacy, John Paul II embodied a unique combination of vision and pragmatism. He understood the power of symbolism, the importance of presence, and the impact of personal example. He reached out to youth, academics, political leaders, and ordinary believers alike, creating a network of influence rooted in principle, compassion, and moral authority. His leadership demonstrated that influence is cultivated not by force or fear, but by integrity, courage, and the ability to inspire others to live in accordance with ethical and spiritual truths. The lessons of John Paul II's election are manifold. His rise to the papacy underscores the importance of preparation, resilience, and steadfastness in the face of adversity. It teaches that leadership is not the accumulation of power, but the responsible exercise of influence, grounded in principle and service. It demonstrates that moral courage is inseparable from faith, intellectual engagement, and ethical discernment. Finally, it reminds us that vision is not merely an idea, but a commitment to action, service, and transformation that extends beyond personal ambition to encompass the welfare of entire communities, nations, and the global Church. As Pope John Paul II began his papacy, he immediately signaled that he would be a leader unafraid to confront challenges, speak truth, and advocate for the dignity of every human being. He embraced a mission that was spiritual, ethical, and global, demonstrating that the papacy is not a position of privilege, but a calling to serve, inspire, and guide with wisdom and courage. His election represented not only a personal milestone, but a moment of hope for millions worldwide, a reminder that resilience, moral courage, and faithful service can transform lives, institutions, and the course of history. In reflecting on this chapter of his life, it becomes clear that the election of John Paul II was a defining moment not only for him but for the world. It was a testament to the power of preparation, perseverance, and moral integrity. It showed that leadership rooted in principle and service can overcome centuries of tradition, cultural expectations, and political pressure. Most importantly, it demonstrated that a life dedicated to purpose, vision, and ethical courage can inspire generations, advance justice, and reinforce the enduring truth that faith, reason, and moral conviction are inseparable in the pursuit of human dignity and global transformation. Pope John Paul II's election reminds us that leadership is a calling, responsibility, and mission. It teaches us that true vision requires moral clarity, courage in adversity, and the willingness to serve beyond personal comfort or acclaim. His life offers a blueprint for anyone seeking to lead with integrity, prepare diligently, act courageously, serve selflessly, and always place principle above expedience. The young bishop from Kraków had now stepped onto the global stage as a shepherd for the world, charged with guiding millions through an era of profound social, political, and spiritual challenges. His election was not the culmination of his journey. It was the beginning of a mission that would touch the lives of countless individuals, shape global conscience, and exemplify the transformative power of faith, leadership, and unwavering moral courage. Chapter 6: Global Pilgrimages and Outreach. One of the defining characteristics of Pope John Paul II's papacy was his unprecedented commitment to taking the Church to the world. From the very beginning, he believed that leadership required presence, and that faith was not meant to be confined to the walls of churches or the corridors of the Vatican. He envisioned a papacy that would bridge cultures, transcend political boundaries, and speak directly to the hearts of the faithful across the globe. His global pilgrimages became a living testament to his conviction that spiritual leadership is inseparable from action, that moral authority is reinforced through engagement, and that faith thrives when it is experienced collectively, personally, and courageously. John Paul II embarked on his first international journey as Pope in 1979, visiting Mexico and the Dominican Republic. The moment he stepped off the plane, it became immediately clear that his approach to leadership was revolutionary. He did not travel as a distant figurehead, he traveled as a shepherd, seeking connection, understanding, and the opportunity to inspire. His presence was magnetic, drawing crowds that numbered in the millions, yet he was intentional in making every individual feel seen, valued, and embraced. Whether addressing clergy, heads of state, or ordinary citizens, John Paul II demonstrated that true leadership requires personal engagement, empathy, and a willingness to meet people where they are, both physically and spiritually. What set John Paul II apart was his ability to engage with diverse cultures and religious traditions, while remaining unwavering in his faith. He traveled to countries with vastly different languages, histories, and political systems, from Africa to Asia, North and South America, and the far reaches of Europe. At every stop, he listened attentively, celebrated Mass with profound reverence, and delivered messages that were at once culturally sensitive and morally bold. He understood that the Church's message of faith, hope, and human dignity must resonate within local contexts, but without compromising the universality of its principles. His pilgrimages were not mere ceremonies, they were acts of moral and spiritual diplomacy, bridges of understanding between communities, and demonstrations that faith can unite across differences. The Pope's outreach extended beyond Christian communities. John Paul II recognized the importance of interfaith dialogue in promoting peace, understanding, and moral clarity in a divided world. He engaged with Jewish leaders, Islamic scholars, Buddhist monks, and other faith communities, fostering conversations rooted in mutual respect, ethical responsibility, and shared humanity. Through these interactions, he reinforced the Church's role as a moral voice in the world and demonstrated that true faith is not isolationist, but engages courageously with others in the pursuit of justice, reconciliation, and peace. He taught that leadership is not threatened by dialogue, it is strengthened by it, and that moral authority is amplified when exercised in humility, openness, and wisdom. One of the most remarkable aspects of John Paul II's pilgrimages was his ability to inspire collective action through personal example. He modeled courage, resilience, and joy, even when faced with physical challenges, political tensions, or hostile environments. His energy and enthusiasm were palpable, demonstrating that faith is not passive but active, not theoretical but lived. By walking among people, addressing large crowds, and offering personal blessings, he showed that leadership is relational, influence is earned through presence and integrity, and inspiration is generated by authenticity, courage, and compassion. Each pilgrimage became a microcosm of his broader mission, to embody the Church's message through action, connection, and moral clarity. John Paul II's travels also highlighted the intersection of faith and social justice. He visited communities struggling with poverty, political oppression, and social injustice, using his platform to draw global attention to their plight. In Central America, Africa, and Asia, he met with the marginalized, emphasizing the Church's responsibility to advocate for the oppressed and promote human dignity. His message was clear: faith is not only a source of personal comfort but a call to action. Leadership, in his view, was inseparable from ethical responsibility, and spiritual authority demanded courage in confronting injustice wherever it existed. In addition to addressing social issues, John Paul II used his travels to reaffirm the spiritual and moral foundations of the Church. He celebrated sacraments, canonized saints, and reinforced Catholic teaching in ways that were accessible, compelling, and relevant. His speeches often combined theological insight with practical moral guidance, challenging listeners to live with courage, integrity, and a deep sense of responsibility to God and neighbor. Through these actions, he demonstrated that faith is not abstract, but transformative, shaping personal conduct, community life, and societal structures. Another defining feature of John Paul II's pilgrimages was his exceptional communication skills. He spoke to millions without losing the personal touch, employing gestures, words, and stories that resonated deeply across cultures. He understood the power of language, symbolism, and narrative to convey ethical truths and inspire moral action. Through personal storytelling, references to local history, and appeals to universal values, he connected profoundly with audiences, proving that leadership is not only about position or authority, but about the ability to communicate vision, purpose, and moral clarity in ways that move people to reflection, courage, and commitment. John Paul II's pilgrimages were also a profound exercise in courage. He visited countries in the midst of political tension, civil unrest, and ideological conflict, often facing potential danger with calm resolve. His presence in such places was a moral statement: faith requires courage, leadership demands resilience, and ethical action often involves personal risk. He modeled the principle that spiritual authority is inseparable from moral courage, and that true leadership is demonstrated not in comfort, but in the willingness to confront adversity, while remaining guided by principle, compassion, and integrity. The impact of John Paul II's pilgrimages extended far beyond the immediate audiences he addressed. Millions of Catholics reported experiencing renewed faith, inspiration, and moral clarity after witnessing his leadership firsthand. His travels reinforced the global unity of the Church, reminding believers that they were part of a worldwide community bound by shared principles, faith, and ethical responsibility. Through his example, he strengthened the moral voice of the Church on issues ranging from human rights to peace, from family values to the dignity of life, demonstrating that spiritual leadership has the power to influence hearts, minds, and societies. John Paul II's pilgrimages also offered lessons in humility. Despite the grandeur of global attention, he remained approachable, compassionate, and attuned to individual needs. He met with people one-on-one, blessed the sick, and offered personal words of encouragement, reinforcing the notion that effective leadership is relational, grounded in service, and attentive to the dignity of each individual. By combining global vision with personal empathy, he demonstrated that influence is greatest when exercised with integrity, humility, and authenticity. The Pope's outreach was not limited to religious instruction or spiritual inspiration. He actively engaged in peace-building initiatives, advocating for reconciliation, diplomacy, and dialogue among nations in conflict. He addressed political leaders, international organizations, and global communities with courage and moral clarity, emphasizing that faith carries with it the responsibility to confront injustice, promote reconciliation, and uphold the dignity of every human being. Through these efforts, he revealed that leadership requires not only vision and inspiration, but also strategic engagement, ethical discernment, and unwavering commitment to principle. John Paul II's global travels were also a testament to the transformative power of presence. He understood that seeing, listening, and engaging directly with communities generates inspiration, reinforces commitment, and strengthens moral authority. Whether in small villages or metropolitan centers, he embodied the principle that leadership is relational, action-driven, and rooted in empathy and courage. His example reminds us that influence is not conferred by title alone. It is earned through authenticity, moral clarity, and the willingness to act boldly in alignment with principle. Throughout his papacy, John Paul II emphasized that faith is not passive but active. He demonstrated that belief must translate into moral action, ethical engagement, and compassionate service. His pilgrimages reinforced this message, showing that spiritual leadership is inseparable from social responsibility, that moral authority is inseparable from courage, and that inspiration is cultivated through presence, empathy, and example. By moving among people, listening to their needs, and advocating for justice and dignity, he created a living example of faith in action, a model that continues to inspire leaders, believers, and seekers of moral courage worldwide. In reflecting on John Paul II's global outreach, several lessons emerge. First, true leadership requires presence, engagement, and courage. It demands the ability to act ethically in complex situations, to communicate vision effectively, and to inspire others through example. Second, faith is transformative when lived actively. It shapes behavior, influences communities, and drives ethical action. Third, moral authority is strengthened by humility, empathy, and genuine concern for the well-being of others. Finally, leadership on a global scale requires both vision and strategic engagement, demonstrating that influence is rooted in principle, courage, and commitment to the common good. By the conclusion of his pilgrimages, John Paul II had traveled to over 100 countries, addressing millions, inspiring billions, and reinforcing the moral and spiritual voice of the Church on the global stage. His journeys were not mere visits, they were profound exercises in ethical leadership, moral courage, and faith-driven action. They demonstrated that spiritual influence is cultivated through presence, integrity, and engagement, and that faith is most powerful when it is translated into action, service, and compassionate leadership. Pope John Paul II's global pilgrimages and outreach remain an enduring testament to the power of courage, faith, and ethical leadership. They remind us that true influence is exercised through action, that leadership is relational as well as visionary, and that the pursuit of justice, peace, and human dignity is inseparable from spiritual conviction. His life demonstrates that faith in action has the power to transform communities, inspire generations, and leave a lasting legacy of moral courage, compassion, and global unity. In the end, John Paul II's journeys were more than a series of visits. They were a living declaration of the Church's mission: to serve, to inspire, to reconcile, and to uphold the dignity of every human being. They serve as a model for all who seek to lead with purpose, act with courage, and inspire others through faith-driven action. Through his pilgrimages, Pope John Paul II showed the world that leadership is not about comfort, recognition, or ease. It is about commitment, presence, and the unwavering pursuit of a higher calling, a higher truth, and the greater good for all humanity. Chapter 7: Advocacy for Human Rights and Freedom. Pope John Paul II's papacy was not only a spiritual journey, but a profound mission of moral courage and advocacy. From the very beginning, he understood that faith cannot remain confined to private devotion. It must engage the world, confront injustice, and champion human dignity. Born under the shadow of oppression in Poland, and having experienced the brutality of both Nazi occupation and communist suppression, Karol Wojtyła carried with him a personal understanding of the value of freedom and the human spirit's capacity to endure. As Pope John Paul II, he translated these lessons into action on a global scale, wielding moral authority to inspire change, uphold human rights, and influence societies long dominated by fear and oppression. Central to his advocacy was his unwavering commitment to human dignity. John Paul II believed that every individual, regardless of nationality, religion, or social status, possesses intrinsic worth and a right to live in freedom. This belief was not abstract. It was the guiding principle behind his engagement with political leaders, his addresses to international organizations, and his public writings. He saw oppression, tyranny, and systemic injustice not merely as political issues, but as moral crises that demanded the voice and action of the Church. From his earliest days as Pope, he recognized that spiritual authority carries with it a profound responsibility to defend the oppressed, to confront injustice, and to act courageously for the sake of moral truth. Nowhere was this advocacy more visible than in Eastern Europe, particularly in his native Poland. The communist regime, with its strict control over political expression, education, and religious practice, sought to suppress not only the Church, but the very spirit of freedom. John Paul II, however, refused to be silenced. His visits to Poland, beginning with his first pilgrimage in 1979, galvanized the population, providing hope, courage, and moral reinforcement to those living under oppression. Crowds gathered in tens of thousands, some standing for hours, inspired not only by the words he spoke, but by the example of his life, a life characterized by unwavering faith, integrity, and resilience. His presence reminded the faithful that oppression could not extinguish the human spirit, that courage can flourish even under threat, and that hope is a force that can shape history. The Pope's influence extended beyond inspiration. Through dialogue, strategic engagement, and moral authority, he exerted a subtle yet profound pressure on the political systems of the time. He encouraged the development of civil society, supported movements advocating for justice, and consistently emphasized the moral responsibility of leaders to act ethically. His support for the Solidarity movement in Poland, which emerged as a powerful force for democratic change, exemplified his understanding of faith in action. Moral courage, reinforced by spiritual conviction, can empower ordinary people to confront injustice and demand freedom. In this context, John Paul II became not only a spiritual leader but a catalyst for social and political transformation, demonstrating that faith can inspire concrete change without compromising principle. Advocacy for human rights was also central to his interactions with global leaders. John Paul II engaged with presidents, prime ministers, and international organizations, addressing issues ranging from poverty to systemic injustice, from war to human trafficking. He approached these dialogues with a combination of humility, moral clarity, and courage. He understood that persuasion is most powerful when rooted in ethical conviction rather than political expediency, and that global influence requires both principle and strategic engagement. Through these actions, he reinforced the Church's voice as a moral authority capable of transcending borders and ideological divides. One of the Pope's greatest strengths was his ability to integrate spiritual values into tangible social action. He did not separate faith from justice, prayer from advocacy, or moral teaching from public engagement. In his speeches, writings, and interactions with communities, he consistently emphasized that the principles of the Gospel, love, justice, compassion, and respect for human dignity, must inform societal structures, political decision-making, and individual behavior. By framing social issues within the context of moral and spiritual responsibility, John Paul II elevated the conversation about human rights from politics to ethics, challenging leaders and citizens alike to act with conscience, courage, and integrity. John Paul II's advocacy was rooted in a profound understanding of the human person. He believed that freedom is not merely the absence of oppression, but the capacity to pursue truth, develop virtue, and flourish in accordance with one's moral and spiritual nature. This vision informed his opposition to systems of oppression, whether in Eastern Europe, Latin America, or Asia. He spoke against totalitarianism, militarism, and economic exploitation with clarity and courage, consistently reminding the world that the measure of society is how it treats its most vulnerable members. His moral reasoning was both accessible and universal, appealing not only to Catholics, but to people of conscience across religious and cultural boundaries. Throughout his papacy, John Paul II's commitment to human rights also manifested in advocacy for religious freedom. He consistently defended the rights of individuals to practice their faith without persecution, emphasizing that freedom of conscience is a fundamental human right. In nations where religious practice was restricted or punished, his voice became a beacon of hope. He met with leaders, addressed assemblies, and visited communities to affirm that spiritual freedom is inseparable from human dignity, and that moral courage requires defending both, even in the face of political hostility. The Pope's approach to human rights was proactive rather than reactive. He did not wait for crises to occur. He anticipated moral challenges and addressed them with clarity, courage, and vision. Whether speaking on issues of economic inequality, migration, or war, he highlighted the ethical responsibilities of governments, institutions, and individuals. His advocacy was never limited to rhetoric. It was grounded in action, presence, and a consistent commitment to the principles of justice, compassion, and moral integrity. In this way, John Paul II exemplified leadership that is both principled and transformative, demonstrating that faith and ethics are inseparable in creating a more just world. John Paul II's engagement with international organizations, including the United Nations and the European Economic Community, demonstrated his understanding that moral leadership requires both global vision and personal courage. He called on nations to uphold human dignity, defend fundamental rights, and promote social justice. His speeches often linked spiritual principles to practical action, illustrating that ethical conviction must inform political decision-making. By framing human rights within the context of moral responsibility, he challenged leaders to act not merely for political gain, but in alignment with conscience, justice, and universal ethical principles. Throughout his advocacy, John Paul II remained unwavering in the face of opposition. There were those who criticized him, dismissed his influence, or resisted his calls for justice. Yet he continued with steadfast courage, guided by prayer, reflection, and moral clarity. He demonstrated that true leadership is not deterred by resistance, and that moral authority is reinforced through perseverance, integrity, and consistent action. His example shows that courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to act rightly despite fear, and that advocacy grounded in principle can shift societies, inspire movements, and transform history. Perhaps the most enduring impact of John Paul II's advocacy was its effect on the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. While many forces contributed to these historic changes, his role was both catalytic and inspirational. By encouraging the faithful to embrace moral courage, supporting civil society movements, and consistently defending the principles of freedom and human dignity, he provided both a moral compass and a practical framework for resistance to oppression. His leadership demonstrated that spiritual authority, when exercised with wisdom and courage, can influence political reality and empower ordinary people to claim their rights and dignity. The Pope's advocacy also exemplified the integration of spirituality and action. He taught that prayer, contemplation, and moral reflection are not substitutes for action, but the foundation upon which effective leadership and ethical influence are built. He modeled a life in which faith inspired courage, where ethical conviction guided engagement, and where spiritual depth reinforced moral clarity. His global interventions reflected a consistent ethic, that every human being is worthy of respect, freedom, and dignity, and that moral courage requires both reflection and decisive action. John Paul II's approach to advocacy teaches timeless lessons about leadership, courage, and social impact. First, moral authority is inseparable from personal integrity and ethical consistency. Second, faith is a force for transformation when it inspires action in the world. Third, courage requires perseverance in the face of opposition, and leadership is most effective when guided by principle rather than expedience. Fourth, engagement with others, including those with differing perspectives, strengthens moral influence and builds bridges for reconciliation and justice. By the end of his papacy, John Paul II had inspired countless individuals, movements, and nations to embrace principles of freedom, justice, and human dignity. His influence extended far beyond the Church, shaping global conversations on morality, ethics, and the responsibilities of leadership. Through advocacy grounded in faith, courage, and vision, he left a legacy that demonstrates the power of principled action to transform societies, uplift the oppressed, and reaffirm the inherent worth of every human being. In reflecting on this chapter of his life, it becomes clear that Pope John Paul II's advocacy for human rights and freedom was not a political strategy, it was a moral imperative born from faith, forged through personal experience and executed with courage and wisdom. He showed the world that ethical leadership demands courage, that spiritual conviction must translate into action, and that the defense of human dignity is the highest calling of both spiritual and civic leaders. His life reminds us that one individual, grounded in principle and guided by faith, can influence nations, inspire movements, and leave a lasting mark on the moral conscience of the world. Ultimately, John Paul II's legacy in human rights and freedom teaches us that moral courage is transformative. It demonstrates that spiritual leadership is inseparable from social engagement, and that faith, when combined with conviction and action, can inspire change, restore hope, and empower people to claim their God-given dignity. His life continues to challenge leaders, believers, and citizens alike to act with integrity, advocate for justice, and live boldly in the service of truth, freedom, and the common good. In every action, every speech, and every journey, Pope John Paul II illuminated the path of moral courage, showing that faith without action is incomplete, and that true leadership is measured not by power alone, but by the capacity to transform the world through principle, compassion, and unyielding commitment to human dignity. Chapter 8: Personal Challenges and Spiritual Resilience. No life of leadership, however inspiring, is without trial. Pope John Paul II's journey exemplifies this truth in a profound way. While his global influence, spiritual vision, and moral authority inspired millions, he also faced personal challenges that tested the very core of his resilience, faith, and endurance. Perhaps no single event highlighted his extraordinary capacity for spiritual strength more than the assassination attempt on May 13, 1981. Standing in St. Peter's Square, a bullet intended to end his life struck him. In that moment, the world was shaken, and the vulnerability of even the most powerful spiritual leader became painfully real. Yet it was not the bullet alone that defined him, but his response, a response rooted in forgiveness, prayer, and unwavering faith. Surviving an assassination attempt is an experience few could fully comprehend, and yet John Paul II faced it with a remarkable depth of resilience. Even amid physical pain, medical uncertainty, and the knowledge that someone had tried to take his life, he chose a path that reflected his lifelong commitment to the principles of compassion and forgiveness. One of his first actions after the attack was to extend forgiveness to his would-be assassin, Mehmet Ali Agca. In the hospital, he spoke not of anger or revenge, but of reconciliation and the transformative power of mercy. This decision, profound in its ethical and spiritual significance, became a living lesson in resilience. True strength does not reside in retaliation, but in the capacity to rise above personal suffering, act with moral courage, and uphold the highest values even when circumstances challenge the limits of human endurance. John Paul II's resilience was not only spiritual, but also intensely practical. Recovering from severe injuries, he endured months of rehabilitation, surgeries, and persistent physical pain. Yet even in the midst of these trials, he maintained his rigorous schedule, continuing to meet with world leaders, deliver speeches, and tend to the spiritual needs of millions. His example demonstrates a critical lesson: physical suffering, while challenging, does not preclude purpose, service, or moral action. On the contrary, it can become a crucible in which spiritual strength is tested, refined, and amplified. He showed that resilience is cultivated, not by avoiding hardship, but by maintaining focus, discipline, and moral integrity, even when the body is weakened and the spirit tested. The assassination attempt was not the only challenge John Paul II faced. Throughout his later years, he endured chronic illness, most notably Parkinson's disease, which gradually impaired his mobility and physical capabilities. Yet even as his body weakened, his spiritual focus and leadership did not falter. He continued to travel extensively, deliver sermons, meet dignitaries, and guide the Church with clarity and moral authority. The courage he displayed in facing progressive physical decline revealed an extraordinary truth: resilience is not the absence of suffering, but the commitment to act faithfully, courageously, and purposefully despite it. He taught the world that true strength is measured not by physical vitality alone, but by the endurance of spirit, the consistency of moral action, and the refusal to allow adversity to define one's mission. John Paul II's response to personal suffering was deeply rooted in prayer and spiritual reflection. He turned to God not as a distant observer, but as an intimate source of guidance, strength, and solace. Through prayer, meditation, and sacramental life, he cultivated an inner resilience that allowed him to navigate immense physical and emotional challenges. This spiritual discipline was not passive, it was active, shaping his decisions, reinforcing his courage, and sustaining his capacity for leadership in the midst of adversity. For those who witnessed him in his final years, the Pope's spiritual endurance became a living testament to the power of faith to transcend physical limitation and human fear. Forgiveness, a central tenet of John Paul II's spirituality, became a defining theme in his response to personal challenges. His decision to forgive his would-be assassin was not a symbolic gesture, but a profound act of moral and spiritual courage. By forgiving, he demonstrated that inner strength is inseparable from compassion, that resilience is intertwined with moral clarity, and that enduring suffering with grace requires the capacity to release resentment and act with ethical courage. This act of forgiveness inspired millions worldwide, showing that even in the face of profound violation and threat, one can choose a path that strengthens the spirit and elevates the moral example of leadership. John Paul II's endurance also teaches a broader lesson about human strength. Suffering, whether physical, emotional, or moral, is an inevitable part of life, particularly for those who take on responsibility, leadership, and service. Yet it is within these very trials that character, courage, and moral clarity are tested and refined. By confronting his challenges with faith, discipline, and moral consistency, John Paul II revealed that adversity is not an obstacle to purpose, but a vehicle for growth, reflection, and inspiration. His life shows that resilience is cultivated in the crucible of difficulty, and that the manner in which one responds to suffering defines the depth of one's moral and spiritual impact. Even amid personal trials, John Paul II maintained a relentless commitment to his mission. He continued to advocate for human rights, engage with political leaders, and travel extensively, despite the toll on his body. His endurance illustrates a profound principle: leadership, courage, and service are not contingent on comfort or convenience, but on commitment to a higher calling. By acting in accordance with principle, even when personal hardship loomed large, he reinforced the idea that moral and spiritual resilience is not occasional but habitual, a constant practice of aligning action with purpose even under duress. The Pope's resilience extended beyond the physical and into the psychological and emotional realms. He faced the constant pressures of global scrutiny, political controversy, and the weight of spiritual responsibility. Yet he met these challenges with serenity, clarity, and unwavering dedication. His example demonstrates that spiritual resilience involves more than enduring pain. It encompasses emotional intelligence, self-discipline, and the ability to maintain focus on long-term purpose rather than transient discomfort. By cultivating these qualities, he inspired not only the faithful, but leaders, activists, and ordinary people seeking to navigate the trials of life with integrity and courage. John Paul II's life also reveals the role of narrative and meaning in resilience. He interpreted personal suffering not as random misfortune, but as a component of his mission, an opportunity to deepen faith, and a chance to model courage and forgiveness for others. This perspective transformed challenges into sources of inspiration and lessons for the world. By framing his pain within a context of purpose and service, he demonstrated a critical principle: adversity can become a platform for moral and spiritual growth when approached with reflection, courage, and faith. His example challenges readers to reconsider their own struggles, not as limitations, but as opportunities to cultivate strength, wisdom, and compassion. The Pope's response to personal suffering had a ripple effect that extended far beyond his own life. Millions were inspired by his ability to confront danger, illness, and opposition with courage and faith. His example strengthened the resolve of those facing their own trials, demonstrating that endurance, moral clarity, and spiritual focus are attainable even under the most daunting circumstances. His life became a living guide for how to navigate hardship, maintain dignity, and act with purpose, reinforcing the idea that resilience is both learned and practiced, and that inner strength is cultivated through reflection, prayer, and sustained action. Perhaps one of the most profound lessons from John Paul II's personal challenges is the integration of forgiveness with resilience. By choosing to forgive even in the face of violence, he revealed that enduring strength is inseparable from compassion. True resilience is not hardened or closed off. It is expansive, capable of embracing others even in moments of personal violation. By forgiving, he demonstrated that courage is not only about withstanding suffering, but also about actively choosing love, mercy, and moral integrity in response to adversity. This lesson resonates universally. Strength without compassion is hollow, and resilience without moral grounding can become rigid and self-serving. Throughout his later years, John Paul II faced mounting health challenges, yet he refused to allow physical limitations to diminish his leadership, advocacy, or spiritual example. His public appearances, speeches, and pastoral work were marked by extraordinary commitment, even when his body was weak and frailty threatened to slow him down. This demonstrated a profound truth: resilience is sustained by purpose, guided by faith, and reinforced by the consistency of action aligned with deeply held principles. The Pope's life shows that enduring leadership is not measured solely by achievement or authority, but by the capacity to maintain integrity, courage, and commitment in the face of continuous personal trial. Ultimately, Chapter 8 illuminates the profound interplay between adversity, faith, and resilience in the life of Pope John Paul II. His survival of the assassination attempt, ongoing health struggles, and the relentless demands of global leadership illustrate the power of inner strength, moral clarity, and spiritual focus. His life teaches that suffering can be transformed into a source of inspiration, that forgiveness amplifies resilience, and that enduring faith enables one to navigate the most extreme challenges with dignity and purpose. John Paul II's example challenges each of us to approach personal adversity not with despair, but with courage, reflection, and moral resolve. His life demonstrates that spiritual resilience is cultivated through prayer, discipline, forgiveness, and a commitment to higher purpose. Through his trials, he inspired the world to recognize that the human spirit, fortified by faith and ethical commitment, can overcome fear, withstand suffering, and serve as a guiding light for others. In conclusion, Pope John Paul II's personal challenges reveal that resilience is not the absence of suffering, but the mastery of response. It is the courage to act with integrity in the face of danger, the patience to endure physical limitations, and the wisdom to transform pain into a force for inspiration and good. By maintaining spiritual focus amid adversity, forgiving those who wronged him, and continuing to lead with moral clarity, he exemplified the highest expression of human and spiritual strength. His life reminds us that faith, courage, and resilience are inseparable, and that enduring personal trials can become a powerful testament to the transformative potential of unwavering commitment to truth, compassion, and service. Chapter 9: Legacy in Faith, Education and Culture. The life and papacy of Pope John Paul II left an indelible mark on faith, education, and global culture. Beyond his travels, advocacy, and resilience in the face of adversity, his enduring influence lies in the structures he built, the teachings he articulated, and the inspiration he instilled in millions of hearts across generations. He was not content merely to lead. He sought to educate, to shape thought, to cultivate virtue, and to ignite a sense of purpose in both the young and the learned. In doing so, he demonstrated that leadership, rooted in moral and spiritual integrity, has the power to transform institutions, communities, and even the trajectory of human civilization. Central to John Paul II's legacy was his unwavering commitment to education, both spiritual and intellectual. As a young man, he had experienced the transformative power of learning, Having studied philosophy and theology under some of Poland's most brilliant minds, while navigating the perils of Nazi occupation. These formative years instilled in him a conviction that education is not merely a pursuit of knowledge, but a means to cultivate virtue, discernment, and moral courage. As Pope, he translated this vision into action, emphasizing that the Church must be a living source of wisdom, ethics, and inspiration in a rapidly changing world. He sought to shape minds and hearts alike, believing that a well-formed conscience is the foundation for a just, compassionate, and spiritually vibrant society. One of the clearest expressions of this commitment was his profound influence on Catholic thought and doctrine. Through his encyclicals, apostolic letters, and speeches, John Paul II provided guidance on topics ranging from human dignity and moral responsibility to the sanctity of life and the role of family. Works such as Veritatis Splendor and Fides et Ratio were more than theological treatises, they were calls to action, invitations to integrate faith with reason, spirituality with ethics, and belief with lived practice. He challenged the faithful to think deeply, to act courageously, and to embrace a worldview where truth, justice, and compassion are inseparable. By combining intellectual rigor with spiritual insight, he left an educational legacy that continues to shape Catholic scholarship, moral reasoning, and ethical leadership worldwide. John Paul II's dedication to education was not limited to academics. He had a special focus on youth. He recognized that young people are both the inheritors and the architects of the future. In 1985, he initiated World Youth Day, a groundbreaking movement designed to engage young people in faith, service, and reflection. These gatherings were not mere celebrations, they were transformative experiences where youth from across the globe could encounter the Church, one another, and the deeper truths of their own lives. Through vibrant ceremonies, meaningful dialogue, and moments of shared prayer, John Paul II instilled a sense of moral purpose, courage, and hope in a generation navigating a world of uncertainty, moral relativism, and rapid cultural change. His approach demonstrated that leadership is not only about addressing current challenges, but also about cultivating the next generation of thinkers, leaders, and moral agents. Another remarkable dimension of his legacy lies in his role in canonizations and the elevation of saints. By canonizing individuals from diverse cultures and historical contexts, John Paul II highlighted the universal applicability of moral virtue, spiritual dedication, and human compassion. Figures such as Mother Teresa, Maximilian Kolbe, and Faustina Kowalska became beacons of inspiration, illustrating that holiness is attainable in every walk of life. These canonizations were more than ceremonial acts, they were educational tools, cultural signals, and moral exemplars, reinforcing the principles of courage, service, and integrity. Through them, John Paul II encouraged the faithful to see that virtue is not abstract. It is lived, embodied, and accessible to anyone committed to living with purpose and love. John Paul II also demonstrated a remarkable capacity to shape culture through dialogue and engagement with diverse communities. He understood that faith must interact with the broader world, addressing not only spiritual concerns, but social, ethical, and cultural challenges. Through interfaith dialogue, he strengthened relationships between Catholics, Jews, Muslims, and other religious communities, fostering mutual understanding and peace. His efforts underscored the notion that leadership, rooted in principle and moral clarity, does not exist in isolation, but engages the broader culture in constructive, compassionate, and courageous ways. By promoting respect, dialogue, and shared ethical values, he helped shape a global culture more attuned to dignity, justice, and moral responsibility. Education, faith, and culture were interwoven throughout his papacy. John Paul II understood that shaping human thought, character, and society requires a holistic approach. He encouraged intellectual inquiry, spiritual reflection and moral reasoning simultaneously, believing that true education cultivates not only knowledge but virtue. By integrating these elements, he built a legacy that transcends temporal leadership, offering future generations a blueprint for moral courage, intellectual engagement, and spiritual depth. His life teaches that education and culture are most powerful when rooted in enduring ethical principles, rather than fleeting trends or convenience. John Paul II's influence also extended through his writings, which combined accessibility with profound depth. Whether addressing theologians, clergy, or the laity, his texts communicated moral clarity, spiritual insight, and practical guidance. They emphasized personal responsibility, ethical courage, and the pursuit of truth, framing everyday life as an arena for moral and spiritual development. His words inspired countless individuals to reflect deeply, act with integrity, and cultivate virtues that enhance both personal fulfillment and societal well-being. In doing so, he reaffirmed the Church's role as a guiding moral and intellectual presence in the modern world. Another remarkable aspect of John Paul II's legacy was his ability to make faith tangible in culture. He used art, music, literature, and symbolism to convey spiritual truths in ways that resonated across borders and generations. Whether through inspiring homilies, poetic reflections, or large-scale celebrations such as World Youth Day, he demonstrated that culture and spirituality are mutually reinforcing. By engaging the senses, emotions, and intellect, he created experiences that moved hearts, inspired action, and deepened moral and spiritual understanding. In this way, his leadership modeled a holistic vision of human development, one that nurtures mind, heart, and soul simultaneously. John Paul II's educational and cultural impact was particularly evident in his approach to global issues. He addressed the ethical dimensions of political, social, and economic challenges with clarity and moral authority. Whether speaking on human rights, peace, poverty, or family values, he consistently highlighted the intersection of faith, ethics, and action. By framing contemporary issues within a moral and spiritual context, he challenged leaders and citizens alike to think critically, act courageously, and prioritize the dignity of every human being. His teachings emphasize that culture is shaped not merely by technology, policy, or economic power, but by ethical vision, moral courage, and principled leadership. The Pope's commitment to youth, education, and culture also reflected a deep understanding of legacy. He recognized that the Church's future depends on nurturing moral vision, spiritual depth, and intellectual engagement in successive generations. Through World Youth Day, educational initiatives, and pastoral outreach, he created platforms where young people could encounter faith in ways that were compelling, practical, and transformative. These initiatives empowered individuals to see themselves as agents of change, capable of acting with courage, integrity, and moral clarity in their communities and societies. Moreover, John Paul II's emphasis on faith, education, and culture reinforced his broader message about leadership. He demonstrated that effective leadership is multifaceted. It requires moral integrity, intellectual depth, spiritual grounding, and cultural engagement. By modeling these qualities, he inspired others to cultivate similar attributes in their own lives. His example illustrates that influence is sustained not by authority alone, but by consistent, principled action, the courage to uphold truth, and the capacity to educate and inspire others through example and guidance. John Paul II's enduring legacy is also evident in the institutions, initiatives, and movements he nurtured. From educational programs to interfaith initiatives, from youth engagement to cultural projects, his leadership created enduring frameworks that continue to inspire, educate, and guide. These accomplishments demonstrate that moral and spiritual influence can be systematically extended through thoughtful, purpose-driven action, ensuring that the impact of leadership transcends temporal boundaries and continues to shape future generations. In reflecting on his legacy, one cannot overlook the personal example John Paul II set. His life exemplified perseverance, humility, courage, and devotion. He demonstrated that influence is rooted in integrity, that education is most meaningful when coupled with virtue, and that culture is most transformative when guided by ethical principles. By integrating faith, intellectual rigor, and cultural engagement, he created a model of leadership that continues to resonate across disciplines, communities, and nations. Ultimately, the legacy of Pope John Paul II in faith, education, and culture teaches us timeless lessons. It reminds us that true leadership is holistic, combining moral authority with intellectual engagement, spiritual depth with practical action, and cultural influence with ethical clarity. His life illustrates that the cultivation of virtue, the pursuit of truth, and the empowerment of others are central to enduring impact. By inspiring generations, nurturing intellectual and spiritual growth, and shaping culture through faith-driven engagement, he ensured that his influence would extend far beyond his own lifetime. Through canonizations, teachings, writings, educational initiatives, and global cultural engagement, John Paul II demonstrated that leadership rooted in moral and spiritual integrity has the power to transform not only the Church but the world. His life is a call to action, inviting each individual to cultivate knowledge, virtue, courage, and compassion. It challenges leaders to act with ethical clarity, educators to instill both wisdom and character, and communities to uphold the dignity and potential of every human being. His enduring legacy is a testament to the transformative power of a life dedicated to faith, education, and cultural engagement, inspiring countless individuals to pursue truth, justice, and the highest ideals of humanity. In conclusion, Pope John Paul II's contributions to faith, education, and culture reveal the breadth and depth of his vision. He taught that intellectual rigor, moral courage, and spiritual devotion are inseparable, and that leadership, when guided by principle and compassion, can inspire generations and shape the moral and cultural fabric of the world. His legacy continues to inspire, reminding us that true influence is exercised through integrity, education, engagement, and unwavering commitment to the principles of faith, virtue, and human dignity. Chapter 10: Lessons from a Life of Faith and Courage. The life of Pope John Paul II offers a rich tapestry of lessons, not only for those within the Catholic Church, but for anyone seeking to live with purpose, integrity, and courage. His journey, from a boy in Wadowice to a global spiritual leader, teaches us that faith, moral conviction, and resilience are not abstract virtues. They are practical tools that shape our daily lives, guide our decisions, and enable us to navigate a world often fraught with challenge, uncertainty, and moral ambiguity. In reflecting on his life, we can extract profound lessons that are immediately applicable to modern life, guiding us towards spiritual depth, ethical action, and purposeful leadership. One of the most striking lessons from Pope John Paul II's life is the power of unwavering faith. His faith was neither superficial nor passive; it was active, courageous, and deeply transformative. From the earliest moments of his childhood, he demonstrated a profound spiritual sensitivity, a sense of moral responsibility, and an openness to divine guidance. This faith became his compass through the trials of war, oppression, illness, and the immense responsibilities of global leadership. For modern readers, his example illustrates that faith is not only a source of personal comfort, it is an active force that informs decisions, strengthens resilience, and inspires action. Living with faith today requires the same courage to trust in principles greater than oneself, to maintain integrity even under pressure, and to approach life with both humility and conviction. Closely tied to faith is the principle of moral courage. John Paul II consistently demonstrated that leadership and influence are inseparable from ethical clarity. Whether confronting political regimes, advocating for human rights, or addressing societal injustices, he acted with a steadfast commitment to what was right, not what was convenient or expedient. Modern life, though often less dramatic, presents similar challenges: ethical dilemmas at work, moral compromises in relationships, and societal pressures that test our integrity. The lesson here is clear. Courage is not merely the capacity to face external threats, but the inner strength to uphold truth, fairness, and compassion even when it is unpopular or inconvenient. His life teaches us that true leadership, whether in family, career, or community, requires moral clarity and the courage to act on principle. Resilience emerges as another fundamental lesson from John Paul II's life. He endured the perils of Nazi occupation, the oppression of communism, personal health struggles, and even an assassination attempt. Yet in every instance he maintained focus, purpose, and commitment to his mission. For contemporary readers, his example underscores that resilience is cultivated through perseverance, reflection, and an unwavering connection to a higher purpose. Challenges, whether professional setbacks, personal losses, or societal upheaval, are inevitable. John Paul II's life demonstrates that resilience is not simply surviving adversity, it is thriving through it, finding meaning in struggle, and emerging stronger and wiser. Daily practices of reflection, prayer, or meditation, combined with purposeful action, build this inner fortitude. Forgiveness stands out as one of the most transformative lessons of his life. Perhaps no single act captures this more vividly than his response to the assassination attempt in 1981. Instead of responding with anger or retribution, he chose to forgive Mehmet Ali Agca, his would-be assassin. This act was not only morally profound but spiritually powerful, illustrating that forgiveness is a conscious decision to release resentment, restore relationships, and reclaim personal peace. In modern life, forgiveness is equally critical. Personal and professional conflicts, disappointments, and betrayals can weigh heavily, but John Paul II's example shows that choosing to forgive is not a sign of weakness, it is a demonstration of inner strength, ethical courage, and spiritual maturity. Forgiveness frees the individual, nurtures empathy, and restores moral equilibrium, allowing one to move forward without being defined by past grievances. Another lesson lies in the importance of service. Throughout his papacy, John Paul II emphasized that leadership is not about power, prestige, or personal gain, but about serving others with humility, compassion, and integrity. He devoted himself tirelessly to the spiritual, social, and moral needs of the global community. His establishment of World Youth Day, his attention to the marginalized, and his constant engagement with diverse cultures highlight that service is the practical expression of faith and ethical responsibility. In everyday life, this translates into small but meaningful acts of service, mentoring others, volunteering, advocating for justice, or simply offering support and kindness to those around us. John Paul II teaches that service rooted in genuine concern for others transforms not only the recipient, but the servant as well, cultivating empathy, purpose, and spiritual fulfillment. Education and intellectual engagement provide yet another critical lesson. John Paul II consistently emphasized the integration of faith and reason, encouraging the pursuit of knowledge, reflection, and discernment. He believed that a well-formed mind is necessary to exercise ethical judgment, engage thoughtfully with the world, and cultivate moral courage. Modern life presents a deluge of information, diverse perspectives, and competing narratives. His example reminds us that intellectual rigor and critical thinking are essential for navigating these complexities. Education is not merely vocational, it is formative, shaping character, moral reasoning, and the capacity to act wisely in alignment with principle. The Pope's dedication to youth also offers practical guidance for contemporary life. He understood that inspiring and educating young people is critical for societal renewal and the cultivation of values such as courage, integrity, and purpose. World Youth Day exemplified this vision, creating spaces where young people could experience the power of faith, community, and moral aspiration. For today's readers, this translates into mentorship, encouragement, and investment in the growth of others. Leadership is not only about personal achievement, but about lifting others, fostering development, and inspiring the next generation to act with courage and integrity. John Paul II's example also teaches us the importance of holistic development, spiritual, intellectual, and moral. He lived in a way that integrated prayer with action, reflection with leadership, and ethical clarity with cultural engagement. Modern life often compartmentalizes these dimensions, treating professional, personal, and spiritual growth as separate domains. His life demonstrates that true impact and fulfillment arise from aligning these areas, ensuring that ethical conviction informs professional decisions, spiritual insight shapes relationships, and reflection guides action. This holistic approach cultivates not only personal integrity, but the capacity to influence communities and institutions constructively. Another practical lesson is the power of vision. John Paul II's life reminds us that leadership and moral influence are most effective when guided by a clear sense of purpose. He had a vision for the Church, society, and the world that combined moral clarity, spiritual insight, and practical action. In personal and professional contexts today, this translates into setting a vision grounded in ethical principles, long-term thinking, and service-oriented goals. A clear vision provides direction, fosters resilience amid challenges, and inspires others to collaborate toward meaningful outcomes. Without vision, effort becomes scattered. With vision, purpose becomes both tangible and transformative. Moreover, his life teaches the significance of courage in dialogue. John Paul II engaged with leaders, communities, and individuals of different faiths, ideologies, and cultural backgrounds with openness and conviction. He demonstrated that moral courage does not preclude humility or dialogue, and that effective influence often arises from the capacity to listen, engage respectfully, and act ethically. Today, in a world marked by polarization, conflict, and rapid change, this lesson is invaluable. Courage is not only about standing firm in principle, but also about fostering understanding, building bridges, and exercising influence through constructive engagement. John Paul II's integration of action and reflection underscores another essential principle: preparation enables effectiveness. He combined prayer, study, and contemplation with decisive action, demonstrating that spiritual depth, ethical clarity, and intellectual preparation are prerequisites for meaningful leadership. For modern readers, this emphasizes the importance of intentional living, cultivating habits, knowledge, and moral insight before facing challenges, making decisions, or assuming responsibility. Preparation grounded in principle amplifies impact, enhances resilience, and ensures that actions are consistent with values. Perhaps most importantly, John Paul II teaches that legacy is built through consistency, integrity, and moral courage. His life shows that influence is cumulative. Every act of service, every decision made with ethical clarity, every choice to forgive, teach, or lead shapes the world in ways that endure far beyond a single lifetime. In a practical sense, this encourages readers to recognize the power of daily choices, the importance of principled action, and the long-term impact of integrity. Even small acts, when aligned with purpose and virtue, can ripple outward, inspiring others and leaving a lasting mark on communities, institutions, and culture. Forgiveness, resilience, service, vision, courage, intellectual engagement, and holistic development. These are not abstract ideals in John Paul II's life, they are practical principles applied consistently, intentionally, and courageously. His example challenges modern readers to cultivate these qualities in daily life, to confront personal and professional challenges with moral clarity, to invest in the development of others, to maintain integrity under pressure, and to act with courage and compassion even in the face of adversity. His life demonstrates that the path to impact, fulfillment, and enduring influence is not in the pursuit of power or recognition, but in the disciplined cultivation of virtue, service, and purpose-driven action. Finally, Pope John Paul II's life offers a profound lesson about the integration of faith and modern living. In a world often divided by materialism, cynicism, and ethical ambiguity, he demonstrates that living with courage, purpose, and moral integrity is possible and transformative. By applying his principles, individuals can navigate challenges with resilience, influence their communities with ethical authority, and contribute to a culture shaped by compassion, justice, and spiritual depth. His example encourages readers to pursue excellence in all dimensions of life, while remaining rooted in moral and spiritual principles, proving that faith and courage are not relics of the past but practical tools for shaping the future. In conclusion, the life of Pope John Paul II offers timeless lessons for anyone seeking to live with purpose, courage, and integrity. His journey teaches us that faith is active, resilience is cultivated, forgiveness is empowering, service is transformative, and leadership is most effective when rooted in moral and spiritual clarity. By integrating these principles into daily life, readers are inspired to act with ethical courage, nurture growth in themselves and others, and pursue a life of enduring impact. John Paul II's example reminds us that each life can be a beacon of hope, virtue, and transformation, and that through faith, courage, and commitment, we have the capacity to shape not only our own destiny but the world around us. His life is an invitation, a challenge, and a model to live courageously, act ethically, and leave a legacy that inspires generations to come. Conclusion: a pope for all time. The life of Pope John Paul II is a testament to the enduring power of faith, courage, and selfless service. From his early days in Wadowice, through the dark years of Nazi occupation, the trials of communism, and the extraordinary responsibilities of the papacy, his life exemplifies what it means to live with purpose, moral clarity, and spiritual conviction. As we close this exploration of his journey, it becomes clear that John Paul II was not only a leader of the Catholic Church, he was a beacon for humanity, a guide, a mentor, and an example of the extraordinary potential inherent in every life committed to faith, courage, and ethical action. His legacy is not confined to religious communities. It resonates across cultures, generations, and disciplines, reminding us that true greatness is measured not by power, position, or recognition, but by the positive impact we have on the lives of others. One of the most compelling aspects of John Paul II's life is the universality of its lessons. Courage, faith, integrity, resilience, and service are not exclusive to the papacy or to religious leaders, they are qualities that each of us can cultivate. John Paul II's courage was evident in countless ways, whether standing firm against oppressive regimes, advocating for human rights, or facing personal threats and physical suffering with grace. He demonstrated that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the capacity to act ethically and decisively in spite of it. In modern life, courage manifests in everyday choices, the decision to speak truth in difficult circumstances, to defend the vulnerable, to pursue justice, and to remain steadfast in one's values even when it is inconvenient or unpopular. His example challenges us to embrace these opportunities for moral courage, recognizing that they define character and shape the world around us. Faith, is another central pillar of his legacy. John Paul II lived a life rooted in a profound trust in God, demonstrating that faith is both a personal anchor and a source of transformative action. His faith was not passive. It propelled him into service, guided his ethical decisions, and sustained him through trials that would have overwhelmed most. For modern readers, his life illustrates that faith is not merely ritual or belief. It is a lens through which challenges are understood, decisions are made, and actions are undertaken. Faith fuels resilience, inspires service, and transforms ordinary acts into extraordinary expressions of virtue and moral leadership. To cultivate such faith today requires commitment, reflection, and a willingness to trust principles greater than ourselves, even when circumstances seem uncertain or difficult. Service, for John Paul II, was inseparable from leadership and moral authority. He understood that leadership is not a privilege, but a responsibility, and that influence is most enduring when it is exercised for the benefit of others. From establishing World Youth Day to advocating for the marginalized and engaging in interfaith dialogue, he demonstrated that selfless action amplifies impact, fosters community, and leaves a lasting legacy. His example teaches that true service requires humility, dedication, and a willingness to place the needs of others above personal comfort or recognition. In modern life, service may take the form of mentoring, volunteering, activism, or simple acts of kindness, but its impact is magnified when guided by integrity, compassion, and a clear sense of purpose. Resilience, another defining feature of his life, offers a profound lesson for today. John Paul II faced immense adversity, from assassination attempts to debilitating illness, yet he maintained focus, purpose, and ethical clarity. His resilience was grounded in his spiritual discipline, his moral convictions, and his unwavering commitment to service. In contemporary life, challenges are inevitable. Personal setbacks, societal pressures, and global crises test our endurance and integrity. John Paul II's life illustrates that resilience is not simply enduring hardship, but transforming it into a source of growth, reflection, and moral inspiration. It reminds us that the human spirit is capable of extraordinary strength when anchored in purpose, faith, and ethical principle. Forgiveness stands out as one of the most transformative lessons of his life. His response to the assassination attempt, in which he forgave his attacker, is a profound example of moral courage and spiritual maturity. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as weakness or submission, yet John Paul II showed that it is a deliberate act of strength, freedom, and integrity. By releasing resentment and extending grace, he demonstrated that forgiveness heals, restores, and empowers both the forgiver and the forgiven. In daily life, this lesson challenges us to confront conflicts, injustices, and personal wounds with courage, empathy, and moral clarity. Forgiveness, as exemplified by John Paul II, is not optional for those seeking authentic resilience and ethical living. It is essential. Education and intellectual engagement were also cornerstones of his legacy. John Paul II emphasized the integration of faith and reason, encouraging thoughtful reflection, rigorous study, and moral discernment. He believed that a well-formed mind is necessary to navigate the complexities of life, make ethical decisions, and influence the world constructively. Today, his life reminds us that learning is not merely about acquiring information, it is about cultivating wisdom, virtue, and the capacity to act with ethical clarity. Whether through formal education, personal study, or reflective engagement with the world, intellectual development, when combined with moral integrity and spiritual depth, equips us to lead, inspire, and serve effectively. John Paul II's engagement with culture and global society offers another vital lesson. He understood that faith and morality must interact with the broader world to effect meaningful change. Through diplomacy, interfaith dialogue, and global initiatives, He modeled a leadership style that was both principled and inclusive. His approach teaches that ethical and spiritual principles are not abstract ideals. They are practical tools for navigating societal complexities, influencing communities, and fostering cooperation. In modern life, this translates into the importance of ethical engagement with colleagues, neighbors, and communities, active participation in civic and cultural life, and the courage to advocate for justice, peace, and human dignity in every sphere of influence. A critical aspect of his legacy is the cultivation of hope. Throughout decades of global crises, political upheaval, and personal suffering, John Paul II maintained a vision of a world transformed by faith, moral integrity, and human solidarity. He inspired millions not merely by words, but through consistent, principled action that demonstrated the possibility of positive change. This legacy of hope is profoundly practical. It teaches us to act with purpose even in the face of daunting obstacles, to persevere when circumstances seem discouraging, and to believe that our actions, however small, can contribute to a better world. John Paul II also offers lessons in holistic leadership. He demonstrated that true influence arises from the integration of moral conviction, spiritual discipline, intellectual rigor, and compassionate action. Leadership is not measured solely by authority or recognition, but by the consistent alignment of principles with behavior, the courage to act ethically, and the dedication to nurture the growth of others. This lesson is universally applicable. In families, workplaces, communities, and nations, effective leadership requires integrity, empathy, and a commitment to a higher purpose. By modeling this integration, John Paul II showed that one can inspire enduring change without compromising ethical or spiritual principles. His life further underscores the importance of vision in personal and collective action. John Paul II had a clear sense of mission, a vision for the Church, and a commitment to global human dignity. This clarity enabled him to make decisive, courageous, and ethical choices throughout his papacy. For modern readers, this lesson is crucial. Vision gives direction, motivates action, and sustains resilience. A clearly articulated purpose, grounded in ethical and spiritual values, guides decision-making, inspires others, and enables individuals to navigate challenges without losing focus or moral grounding. Another enduring lesson is the transformative power of example. John Paul II's influence was amplified not only by his words or policies, but by the consistency of his character, the courage of his convictions, and the integrity of his actions. He demonstrated that living according to one's principles, even under pressure, is one of the most powerful ways to inspire change. In contemporary life, the example we set through kindness, diligence, ethical courage, and service resonates far beyond immediate circumstances, influencing families, communities, and societies. His life reminds us that character is contagious, and that authenticity, moral consistency, and courage are the foundations of lasting impact. Finally, Pope John Paul II teaches us that every individual has the capacity for courage, faith, and positive impact. His life was shaped by ordinary beginnings, human struggles, and personal trials, yet through discipline, reflection, and commitment to virtue, he transformed those challenges into a source of extraordinary influence. This is the ultimate lesson. Greatness is not reserved for the few. It is cultivated through intention, action, and the consistent practice of courage, integrity, service, and faith. Each reader is invited to embrace this potential, to live intentionally, lead ethically, forgive generously, serve selflessly, and leave a lasting mark on the world. As we reflect on Pope John Paul II's life, it becomes evident that his legacy is a call to action for all of humanity. It is a reminder that moral courage, faith, and service are not abstract ideals. They are practical tools for navigating life's challenges and creating meaningful change. His life teaches us that adversity can be transformed into strength, suffering can be transformed into purpose, and each individual has the capacity to shape a legacy of integrity, compassion, and inspiration. In conclusion, Pope John Paul II remains a figure for all time because his life embodies principles that are universally applicable: courage in the face of fear, faith in the face of uncertainty, resilience in the face of adversity, forgiveness in the face of harm, and service in the face of opportunity. He challenges us to live not merely for ourselves, but for the betterment of others, to act not for recognition but for righteousness, to endure not for survival but for purpose. By embracing his lessons, we are invited to cultivate our own inner strength, to act with integrity, and to live lives of lasting impact. Let this be a moment of reflection, inspiration, and commitment. Choose daily to act courageously, to nurture faith, to serve with humility, to forgive with grace, and to pursue a life aligned with your highest principles. In doing so, we honor not only the memory of Pope John Paul II, but the very potential within ourselves to shape a world enriched by moral clarity, ethical action, and spiritual depth. The world needs courageous hearts, steadfast faith, and selfless service, and it begins with the choices we make each day. The life of John Paul II reminds us that every act, every decision, and every moment of integrity contributes to a legacy far greater than ourselves, a legacy that inspires, transforms, and endures for generations to come. A pope for all time, he leaves behind a timeless challenge: to live intentionally, lead ethically, and serve selflessly. His life calls us to action not as passive observers, but as active participants in shaping a better world. Through courage, faith, resilience, and service, we can honor his legacy by cultivating the virtues that define a life of enduring impact. Let us rise to that call, embracing our potential to be agents of positive transformation, living with purpose, and leaving the world better than we found it. Thank you for reading this book. I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to leave us a review. TM Light. Disclaimer. This book was created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. While every effort was made to ensure the accuracy and relevance of the content, readers should note that this cannot be considered professional advice. Readers are encouraged to apply their own judgment and consult experts where needed.